Well, thank you, Mr. Gaston de Romani, Chairman, Paris Europlace, and Chairman of a company that is a great partner of India in the infrastructure sector. You've made a very wise choice, I must say, including in the airports that you are now an equal partner in. It's a real pleasure and a real honor for us to be the country of honor at the Paris Infraweek, and it's a real privilege to follow Minister Bruno Le Maire in speaking to you at the inaugural session. I think it reflects two very important features. One, that it reflects the strength of India-France strategic partnership, which encompasses every dimension of our national endeavor, from economy to security to education to culture, and in which the French businesses have been playing a very important role, particularly in the infrastructure sector, right from the time we began our journey as an independent nation 75 years ago. And the second is that India today is the new frontier of infrastructure, both because of the needs and the aspirations of a nation of 1.4 billion people, now moving rapidly on the path of growth, but also because of the geopolitics, which are now affecting economic choices and are raising new questions of sovereignty, strategic autonomy, and resilience. There is also the larger question of climate change, and the crisis is no longer an abstract science, but a lived reality that we saw this summer across the world. But we know from various studies that infrastructure influences about 92% of the Sustainable Development Goals, but is also responsible for 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions, placing for the world the extraordinary dilemma of ensuring that prosperity goes hand in hand with protection of the planet. And I think it is no longer a trade-off, but something that has to be combined together. So for India, going forward, there are four objectives that infrastructure must fulfill. One, of course, is that it must support our aspiration of achieving growth rates on a long-term basis of 8% a year, but also use infrastructure for inclusion and empowerment of people. The second, of course, is to ensure that this future is sustainable and climate resilient. The third is that we reduce our vulnerabilities, increase our resilience, strengthen our strategic autonomy and sovereignty in every sense of the word, which, again, the past 2 years of the pandemic and the recent crisis have demonstrated is critical for all countries. And finally, use the power of digitalization to achieve these three objectives, but also use digitalization for mainstreaming the people and empowering our people and achieving the speed and scale of economic progress that is perhaps was unprecedented or unthinkable before the digital age dawned upon us. As you are all familiar, in the course of the past 2 years, we've experienced pandemic, but we've recovered well. The last quarter, we experienced a growth rate of 13.1%. We should end the year, according to IMF, despite the current Ukraine conflict, at 7.4 to 7.5% a year. The recovery has in large part been because of enhanced government spending on infrastructure, which saw a growth rate of 35% over the last 2 years. But more broadly, if anyone who has followed the India story would have been seeing the scale and the speed at which infrastructure has been growing, whether it is adding nearly 40 kilometers of expressways every day, doubling the allocations on railways, 6 new mega ports, 18 new greenfield airports, 25 million housing units for the rural poor, 550,000 kilometers of optic fiber cable network laid in just the last 4 to 5 years. It is also in the energy sector where we have doubled our capacity of power generation over the course of the past 10 years. The story continues. So we've also added about 111 new waterways that have been identified, something that we had ignored for the past 50 to 60 years. There is also the other side, the social inclusion side, where we've been able to build 116 million toilets to ensure that every person has access to modern sanitation facility, where we've added 25 million, as I said, houses for the rural poor, and where in the course of the past 3 years, we've provided potable water connection to 62 million households. We have increased the potable water connection from an abysmal 16% of the households to now 51%, and India has 191 million households, so that's quite a scale to achieve. But when we look to the future, we recognize that this is not quite enough. We have been investing at the rate of at the public spending, about $100 billion to $125 billion in infrastructure. That's about 5 to 6% of the GDP has been the long-term trend in infrastructure spending. But when we look to the future, we need to raise it to about 9 to 10% of the GDP. And therefore, we have a plan to invest about $1.5 trillion over the next 5 years in order to achieve the growth rates that we want. $1.5 trillion. But it is quite clear that it isn't just going to be the government that will be able to meet that level of expenditure. It has to be in partnership with private sector, with financial institutions. And therefore, we have unleashed a wide range of schemes to enable that. One, of course, is an excellent public-private partnership model. As many of you know, India has the second largest number of public-private partnership projects in the developing world and will soon be the largest. We have created a national infrastructure pipeline of $1.5 trillion, which has very specific identified infrastructure projects, mostly de-risked already. We have created a national monetization pipeline in order to monetize brownfield projects and unlock both the potential of the projects, but also recycle the funds to invest in new projects. We've started viability gap funding for up to 20% in terms of grant assistance. We've set up new institutions like National Infrastructure Investment Fund and the Development Financial Institution. But we're also working on strengthening our long-term debt market, which has hitherto been not very strong in India, and have introduced new instruments like REITs, InvITs, and infrastructure debt funds with liberal tax regimes. And it is also now a sector which is almost entirely open to foreign direct investment up to 100% and has extremely, extremely liberal tax regimes, nearly 100% tax exemption for investments by sovereign wealth funds and specified financial institutions within a narrow window of the next 4 to 5 years. And this is something which people need to take advantage of. But in order to make it simpler to implement infrastructure projects, we've also started what is called the Gati Shakti scheme, which Prime Minister launched in October last year. Gati is speed, Shakti is power, the power of speed. And the central purpose of this is to make sure that we create a common digital platform on which 16 ministries of government of India and all the state governments can operate in a seamless manner. And those who implement infrastructure projects know how annoying it is to work across different ministries and different governments. So this is a very important scheme to make it easy and quick to implement infrastructure projects. And finally, we have just launched the National Logistics Policy, which seeks to lower the logistics costs in India from about 14 to 15% to about 8% over the next 6 to 7 years by 2030. This is a very important new initiative for a number of reasons I'll come to. But let me focus a little bit on the clean energy side, which is a very important area. Now, we are the only G20 country, and I say this with confidence, that is more than on its meeting its Paris commitments, the COP21 commitments. Today, 41.8% of our energy is from non-fossil fuels. And that is, of course, includes hydro projects, but it is largely because of the surge in tide of solar and wind power, which rose from almost negligible levels just 7 to 8 years ago to now about 115 gigawatts of solar and electric power in India, 115 gigawatts. By 2024, 2025, this is going to go up to 225 gigawatts with an investment of $150 billion. Our new commitments made at Glasgow, of course, is that we will have 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. We will reduce carbon emission by 1 billion tons and reduce the carbon intensity of our economy by 45% over the 2005 level, and we will achieve net zero by 2070. Quite an ambitious commitment for a developing country with still low per capita consumptions of energy. The supply side is one side. Of course, we have got a new national hydrogen mission where we intend to build, to have a capacity of 5 million tons of clean hydrogen by 2030. And EDF of France is going to be an important partner in that, just as many of the other institutions, and so will Total, which has just signed an agreement with Adani Group in India for massive investments in hydrogen. Nuclear is an important part of our energy future, and here again, EDF will be an important partner in that endeavor as we seek to build a 10,000 megawatt EPR, with 6 EPR reactors in India in the near future. But it is also on the demand side that we have instituted measures to ensure that industry, transportation, especially railways, road, and cars, and also buildings and industry transition towards use of clean energy. And so we've set targets for hydrogen usage by the most energy-intensive industries. We've got programs with liberal incentives for making storage batteries and for accelerating the introduction of electric vehicles. We are seeing a growth rate of 30 to 35%. And next year, we will now launch our first hydrogen-based train. Hopefully, it will be a success and pave the future for heavy haulage being based on hydrogen. So this is the sort of a transition from, on the supply side, enhancing clean energy, on the demand side, ensuring that industries, buildings, households, mobility all transition towards clean energy. And by the way, we're also building 50 metros to move mass transit away from roads onto the rails. And a part of this, of course, is financing. Every year, we are doing about $45 to $50 billion of green financing. But I think the need is for more than 100 billion, and that is where international partnerships will become critical, and France and Europe will be an important partner in that endeavor. Digitalization, everyone's heard about the Indian digital story. We've created a public digital infrastructure which is open, inclusive, democratic, free, not owned by big tech or owned by the state. And that has been possible because we've systematically pursued, on the basis of 1.3 billion biometric identity, open source platforms which anyone can use and create and innovate solutions. That is the reason why today we are the world's largest digital payment system. We've added 450 million bank accounts. We have transferred $300 billion of direct benefit transfer in terms of welfare schemes. So today you have about 6.5 billion transactions a month using digital payments. And this is also the reason why we were able to deliver 2.4 billion doses of COVID vaccines and provide free food to 800 million people over 2 years during COVID using digital, open source digital platforms which we've created. This is a huge revolution. And today we are speaking to France and Europe and ensuring that we can build similar protocols so that the public digital infrastructure remains what it is, public and not in the hands of a few, just as we have today built an open source, open digital e-commerce platform on which anyone can ride without having to go by the whims of some of the big tech owners. But there is something. 2 days ago, we launched our 5G network, and by early 2024, we hope to cover the entire country with 5G network and make it affordable. As many of you know, India today has the highest digital data consumption of about 14.1 GB per person per month, but also one of the lowest priced data in the world. So this is the way it is changing. And now we are also going to be launching semiconductor manufacturing in India. There are at least 3 projects which will ensure that we have not just public digital infrastructure, but also the supply chain resilience in the hardware sector. And we are now going to be working towards building our own 6G platforms and 6G networks. Much of what we have done in 5G in terms of software and integration has largely been done indigenously, but we hope that in 6G we can become independent. That is also so important today in creating a resilient industry and a sovereign system of infrastructure. And finally, therefore, in the manufacturing sector, we have launched the performance-linked initiatives that cover 13 sectors and a number of industrial parks, including 38 electronics industrial park, 2 defense industrial corridors, and 11 industrial corridors, 197 food parks, and so on and so forth. And the purpose is, once again, to tap into the geopolitical changes that are taking place and accelerate our own domestic industrialization and become an integral part of the global supply chain, and in which infrastructure expansion, both digital and physical, and clean energy, all 3 will play a very important role. And let me conclude by saying that France is and will remain a very strong partner for us. Every sector of our infrastructure, we see a very strong French presence. And as we look to the future, it isn't just about clean energy, it isn't just about the hard infrastructure or about what we are doing together. It is also about what we can do together for the rest of the world. And in the Indo-Pacific region, we are already working in a number of ways. We are the co-founders of the International Solar Alliance, which now has 107 countries. We are partners in the Coalition for Disaster-Resilient Infrastructure. We are working together in Prime Minister Modi's initiative for One Sun, One World, One Grid, in which EDF is playing a very important role in examining the technical feasibility of implementing this. And we are working together also on connectivity projects in Indo-Pacific region, which offer countries sovereign choices and create infrastructure which are sustainable both on maritime and land. And as I said, India is now totally open for investments. Paris is going to emerge as an important center for ideating and innovating on infrastructure financing, which will be sustainable. And I must say that in this context, you'd be happy to know that one of our asset management companies has relocated from London to Paris, which is a sign of the emerging attractiveness of Paris as a center for both business as also of ideas and innovation. And I think together, India and France, when we look at our strategic goals that Prime Minister and President Macron have set, helping a world achieve a more sustainable future in a prosperous future is an important part of that objective. So I'd like to thank, again, the Paris Infraweek for taking India as the country of the honor. And I think this will be a catalyst and a platform for much deeper cooperation between our 2 countries and between India and Europe to help build a truly multipolar and peaceful world for the future. Thank you very much for your patience and understanding. Thank you.